So I'd like to introduce our next speaker. He's Shivadasa Grady Morton. He's a retired U.S. Air Force colonel, former F-16 jet fighter pilot, licensed attorney, and guitar-playing philosopher and philanthropist. And he's going to talk about 5-MEO DMT as rocket fuel. So I'm really happy to present Shivadasa Grady Morton.
Thank you. I had a spiritual awakening that began on a 5-MEO DMT trip in 2019. And my first person perspective now, after having gone through all this and sorted it out, is that there are no dharmas, there are no Buddhas, there are no sanghas, there's no teachers, no students, nothing to be taught, nothing needs to be learned. No worshiper, nobody to worship. To open one's mouth and begin to utter anything about it at all is to adulterate the truth of it, which comes down to silence. And deep in the middle of that silence, in the lotus of the heart, you find absolute awareness of unfathomable love and grace. Now, I can keep talking and tell you my biological history of this nama rupa, or we can do a Q&A or whatever you want to do. But the basic overview of my life is hedonism 101 all the way to almost age 50. I'll just go through I'll tell you about my early background, my middle years, which I call ego and sense pleasure chasing. The 40s, which is the dark night of the soul. Early 50s, just at the edge of the horizon, dawn starts to break. Trying to find a way. September 2019, Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Took a while to come to terms with that. 6 weeks of emotional and psychological instability, and still an ongoing process to incorporate and figure out exactly what that was all about. But so starting at the beginning, I had a childhood that I felt very close to God, but there was trauma in my family, just like there's trauma in everybody's family. Had a 50-year-old father with a 20-year-old mother, very sexually charged household atmosphere, control, power, infidelity, abuse. Karmic endowments, though. I had a very gifted intellect and somehow an absolutely fearless psyche, almost as if I knew then that death was really not something that we should get all that concerned about. Well, I got into the middle years and got involved in ego and sense pleasure chasing and became a fighter pilot, an Air Force colonel, very respected, 3 combat tours, 2 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, killed many people, faced death many times. Years later, flying as an airline pilot, making a lot of money. I got bored as an airline pilot, went to law school, became a multi-millionaire. And my wine and women at that point were the best that money could buy. Moving into the 40s, dark night of the soul. Sex addiction, horrible. Too much is not enough. 2 failed marriages, suicide attempt by the second wife, multiple relationships failed, shame, PTSD, suicidal ideation, drove me to psychotherapy. Trying to find a way. Psychotherapy led me to Buddhism because the Buddha talks about suffering, and I was suffering. So I was in a monastery in Nepal in 2017, trying to sort all this out. Back to therapy in Atlanta. The therapist led me to a group that uses psychedelics. I never had. I was in the military. Ended up without any psychedelic experience whatsoever, with the exception of 1 idiosyncratic mushroom journey about a year before that, that a guy that I was in a group therapy session with introduced me to. But so Nirvikalpa Samadhi, come back from that, and it was unstable. What is a peak experience? It can't be, it wasn't something that I could find by looking for. It's a gift of grace given by God. And what happens after this dissolution is an unnamed, stateless, unmoving, ungraspable, indefinite something that's beyond light and darkness and all pervading. It's a state of consciousness that's not consciousness. And it's that consciousness from which the Christ and the Buddha consciousness emerge. United in it or with it, we are that from which was manifested the Christ and the Buddha. So what happens after September 2019? Had a lot of good support from my therapist and my group. And I was dreaming that I was dying. In every dream, it would be a mundane dream that would lead to the event of my death. And I would become terrified, and I stopped sleeping for about 10 days. And I went to my son's house, and I had an experience of being tempted with the most taboo type sexual stuff that you could ever imagine, stuff that was right up my alley formerly. And I could feel that energy, and I said, I'm not going back there. And I moved it up from down there up, and as soon as it got into my heart, it exploded out into the universe. And I've never been bothered by that again. So what is there now? I mean, what is there to do? Everything's just happening. Whatever there might be that would get involved doing things, just another ego trip. So what am I doing? I'm trying to just be a conduit for God's peace, whatever that means. It may mean nothing more than me sitting here in this house with my 2 cats in West Georgia, and I don't need to work or do anything. It may just mean that. That's fine. Or it may mean the utter destruction of everything, and I'm fine with that too. Now I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Shivadas, for that really heartfelt expression of what you went through. I think that is the mark of having reconciled your humanness with your divineness, where you say, it is what it is. I am what I am, and my life is like this. Whether it's going to be something great and famous, or whether it's going to be me sitting in the room with the cats, it's the same. It has the same value. Life is life expressing through me. Does anyone
I have gotten interested in understanding this from different perspectives. So I continued studying Buddhism and got into Advaita Vedanta, which is an awesome philosophy. And now lately, back into Christianity again, looking at it from a little bit higher place on the mountain, and it's an awesome, complex and awesome religion, really. And I hate to say that, but the core teachings of all these saints point to the same reality. And it's fascinating to really get into it and start looking at it.
Nicole has a question. It's in the chat. What is the origin?
The Shivadasa. See, I was unable to follow a path to God through a bhakti practice or worship or devotion practice, because I had alienated myself from God to the point that it was impossible. So I had to use Buddhism, but then I had a calling that led me to the Advaita Vedanta, and the Swami that's my guru in Advaita Vedanta said that this can all be synchronized, and it got me back into a worship, the idea that I wanted to worship God somehow. And I first got back to worshiping God through the manifestation of the Hindu god Shiva, which is the god of destruction, who I identified with, because I was a destroyer as a pilot and a guy in combat destroying, and I had my own worlds destroyed that I needed to have destroyed. So Shiva, it just means worshiper of God as Shiva, basically.
It also seems to me like the idea of destruction and creation being really two sides of the same coin, like life and death and growth and decay. And it seems like maybe it helped you to understand that, because the Hindu philosophy in particular, especially the Bhagavad Gita, is all about how you reconcile the fact that there is war and there is killing and destruction in life, and it's a part of life.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate metaphor there in the Gita is that the war is the one that takes place within the self. So it's Krishna and Arjuna are one and the same, but Arjuna does not understand this, and so has to be taught by Krishna.
Right, and so that's the classic kind of war or opposition or conflict between what they call the egoic self and the divine self. It's really the same two, those dualities that you're talking about, and that you have the opportunity to transcend. But what you say, the reason I bring it up is I think that when somebody has an awakening experience, one of the things it presents is a paradox about how to be a human when you understand that you're also divine. And learning how to be a human is part of that journey of integrating that experience, and your identity changes, your identity and sense of self. So I think you the way you presented your thing brings up a lot of very interesting processes and things that one goes through in after an awakening, after a really big experience like that. I guess I don't have a question. I was just observing. I was very moved by your talk. Somebody else here has a question. Darina, what is your take on plant medicines and pets and animals overall?
My take on plant medicines is that they offer a huge potential for people to grow spiritually, but they're going to be misused, and there's going to be quote unquote tragedies that happen along the way as the result of this. But in the proper framework, it can induce an experience of this nirvikalpa samadhi and change a person's life. But if it's going to be that intense of an experience, there needs to be a framework to come back into, because it's extremely disorienting without that. That's why normally it takes years and years of meditative practice for somebody to enter one of these states, because they're able to stabilize it on the way up, and then the experience or non-experience or whatever it is, and kind of stabilize it after coming back out of that or whatever. It's pretty daunting task to be dumped into this and have to sort it all out. Thank God I've been to that monastery, I mean, if I hadn't had Buddhism 101, I would have had no framework and no context.
Yeah, exactly. I think you need a philosophical framework and context to be able to integrate those experiences. And I part of the reason I started Awake is because I'm concerned that people are just, the enthusiasm to jump into psychedelic experiences with the lack of understanding of what they actually are is a kind of a very it's a recipe that can lead to, for some people, having very unexpected effects. And so the more people understand about integration and what it takes, and also that it's a journey, it's a lifelong journey of both relationship to your consciousness and raising your consciousness, and integrating it back into the world. And that journey is like an evolution of the soul. That's what you would call the evolution of the soul. Whether you believed in a soul or not, you can say evolution of a human being if you don't believe in that there is a soul. So very important what you're talking about. And I think that that's a key message that I would like to get out there about that integration. You know, some things can take decades to integrate. Some things you integrate overnight. And
well, I mean, here's my opinion on how it needs to be. The best way to integrate it is to start doing a spiritual practice, whatever it might be, so that you can do the internal work that has to be done, that's keeping you from having this God experience all the time, as opposed to having it be whenever I take a psychedelic, you know. And
right.
The way to do it is just the way that, unfortunately, and I hate to be a killjoy, but the way to do it, in my experience, is that you've got to do what the Buddha said to do, and don't do the things that he said not to do. Or you could look at it from a Christ standpoint, and you've got to do those sorts of things and stop doing the things that they said not to do. That's the only way. You can't have your spiritual cake and eat your materialistic world at the same time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. I think Sandra has a question.
Yeah, I do. It was actually along the lines of what you guys are both discussing. It's this idea of, if there is a need for a framework or certain things that would be helpful for integration, what that would look like. And it sounds like you're suggesting that, you know, you need to really have a belief system like in Buddhism or Christianity, but many come from no belief system whatsoever, and want to have spiritual experiences. What would you suggest for those people who come without having any sort of, maybe even have meditation practices, but don't have the sort of spiritual experience yet that allows them the possibility of even considering a practice or a belief system?
Well, I would say that it's never too late to start on one, to try to explore and find one that'll work for you, you know. And there's the number of paths to God is the same as the number of people there are trying to find God. It's all an individual path, but you've got these systems that people that were sages. I mean, these people had things happen to them and they had the experience and they came back and tried to help other beings. They've already mapped out a general guideline of how to go. If you can't believe in God, then I don't know of any other path except for Buddhism, but Buddhism works fine whether you believe in God or not. Buddhism is just practices. Ultimately, at the philosophical level of Buddhism, there's no creator God because of the fact that there's nothing that is inherently existing on its own, which the creator God would have to be. But in Buddhism, philosophically, they say there can't be that. Everything arises together and ends together. So the answer to I think people should try to find a spiritual path and don't think that there's really any kind of shortcuts. That's my advice.
I appreciate that advice, you know, to not think that you're going to get the cake without doing the work, as it were. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that. So Shivadasa, I enjoyed your talk greatly. And I think at the end of the day, I like what you said at the beginning. There isn't really anything to say. Or I think that's what you said.
I say, yeah, I mean, it's the way that can be spoken about is not the way, of course, but you have people, we're all here talking about it in different ways, you know, we're trying to. The difference is some people are talking because they like to be the center of attention and they're wanting attention, or maybe they're wanting you to buy something from them or whatever. Seriously, I mean, there's a lot of people that are involved in spiritual materialism where it's an ego game. So you gotta see through that. You know, if there's somebody that's had the experience and can teach you something you don't know, then as long as you understand that there's nothing that can ever be said that is going to actually be the truth.
I think that the trying to express it, that's also a part of the journey. And you may not be, there are certain things about the psychedelic experience or about a samadhi experience that are inexpressible. There's no question about that. But there's a lot of it that we can talk about. Maybe it's circling around it, but it helps people to understand the terrain and to understand the value of getting there. And that's kind of what we're trying to do, because there's a lot of people who are in various states of misery or mental illness or depression in the world today. It's kind of unprecedented, more than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And for those people to understand that there are perceptual shifts that can be taken intentionally that will put you into another state of consciousness, it's very valuable, right? Liberating, and can liberate them. So yeah, I agree with you that silence is golden and silence is where it all happens. But I think there is a dharma. I think that there is a purpose to life. There is a path, and it all doesn't matter. The both are true. It's a paradox. It's you're living inside a paradox, right?
Exactly.
Well, Om Namah Shivaya, as they say.
Yes. Oh, Thank you. Thanks, everybody.